Hey friends and foes, welcome to Brushwork Podcast. My name is Stephanie Scott, and today I want to talk to you about stories and storytelling. I've been thinking a lot about stories lately. I've been thinking about how to tell them through my artwork. I've been thinking about how to write them out and share them with the world. I've been thinking about ways to tell stories and how it benefits my artwork and how it changes the ways that people see my work and the ways that people want to buy my work, and how storytelling is really powerful and it creates connections. I think it's obvious that stories connect people. I think I don't have to say it for you to know this, but I think it's less obvious when you look at something like an abstract painting. I think sometimes when I make abstract art and I make very hard-edged, very bright, lots of gradient abstract pieces, they're geometric in nature, and it's hard for people to see the stories that come from it. And I wanted to talk about how I've been doing a little experiment this last week with some of my storytelling. Now, I'm the kind of person that is pretty reserved about sharing my deepest, darkest, most intimate thoughts. I don't say a lot of my most personal stories here on the internet. I don't say them on the podcast. I sometimes say them on Twitch, but not so often that I feel like everyone knows everything about me. But I had a story that I wanted to share that was biographical in nature, and I thought I'm gonna test out telling people this story, and I want to see what happens. This idea I had was twofold in nature. I wanted to test the story, right? I wanted to see how it felt to show this story, this very emotional, very kind of tragic story I had with the world, and what would happen if I did share it, and how would that make me feel, and would I feel better for having shared the story, and would people connect with it and connect with the new painting that I was showing even more? I'm not new to storytelling. In fact, I have been writing stories for over a decade at this point. You know how I talk about NaNoWriMo sometimes in my podcast? NaNoWriMo is short for National Novel Writing Month, and every November I write 50,000 words, about 2,000 words every single day. A little bit less than that. I have practiced writing stories since I was, 22, and I have never shared anything that I've written with the world. All those stories I've written, novels in fact, have stayed on my hard drive, and many of them will stay there because a lot of them were very much beginner work. But the act of storytelling was something I've been training myself on for this decade, it's very fun. I'm also someone who loves to read. I consume books at least 50 a year. I'm reading several books at the same time at all times. I have an art book club, but I also have a personal book club with my friends. I love reading stories. When I play video games, which you know if you ever watch any of my Twitch channels, I love playing video games. And when I play a game, my favorite games are always one that have heavy, well thought out, full stories. I'm not in the game for ambiance. I'm not in a game for a certain type of platformer or adventure. I'm here for the great stories. I think people are naturally drawn to stories. I think people hear a story, whether it's a piece of gossip from a friend or it is a whole piece of literature, and they feel more connected. I feel like stories make people feel sentimentally attached to the storyteller, but also the story itself. And it's pretty powerful. That's the way that humans connect to each other. And it feels fun to tell stories, and it feels moving to tell stories, and storytelling is how we learn things, and it's a magic tool. So this last week or so, I've been telling the story about my grief. You might remember I had an episode out, I guess it's 2 years ago now, almost 2 years ago, about grief and art and how I make art through grief. And this story that I was telling isn't about that particular grief, but one that happened more recently. This last November for NaNoWriMo, I wrote the story of... my relationship with my longtime pen pal. And for the last week, I've been sharing that story on Instagram. this story that I wrote about my pen pal, she died, and I wanted to say things about my grief, but I also wanted to say things about my joys in that relationship I had with her. And I wanted to talk about how I was working through my grief through painting. On Instagram, I have a new painting, and I'm going to put a picture of it here. But this painting is called Sleep on the Floor. It's a 9-paneled piece, and it's quite big. It's 48 inches by 48 inches altogether. I wanted to show each panel individually as an Instagram post, but I also wanted to tell the story of the painting as I was posting it, because it's 9 panels, it's 9 pictures. It takes a while to post all that. Sometimes when I see people post on Instagram and they have like a 3-post spread or something, they won't put anything in the captions, and it becomes something easy to flick by. But I wanted to take a chance here and tell the truth of this painting that I had made, but also fully tell the story and be vulnerable about it. I think authenticity has a lot of power. I think authenticity makes people connect with you and connect with your artwork in a way that perfectionism doesn't allow. And I think authenticity makes fans for life of your work. In this experiment I've done the last week of posting this picture, this piece of art called Sleep on the Floor, has kind of proved that. It's kind of shown me I should be more honest and more open with myself about what is happening in these paintings, but also what is happening in these heavy moments of my life. It's so easy to share the perfect version of yourself online. In fact, it's often encouraged. And I feel like there's a balance between sharing too much and sharing too little, and sharing enough for you to be connecting with people, but not sharing too much that people can hurt you with it. And I feel like this story that I told almost crosses that line where people could use this against me. And you can hear the emotion in my voice where I'm nervous about it. I'm nervous about sharing the story. But it's done. I kind of left off the cliff with it. I wrote it out. So basically what I did was I took what I wrote in November during National Novel Writing Month, which I had spent 4 weeks on, and I had broken it down into 9 parts. And then I had edited it, and I made it catchy and interesting that when people saw the first line, they were like, they get the hook, and they're like, oh, I want to read more about this really sad story that happened to my life. And it is sad, and it is interesting, I think. So I'm actually going to read you what I wrote, and you're going to hear emotion in my voice. And I want you to know that I've processed a lot of this grief, and that is basically what the story is about. This painting is called Sleep on the Floor, and this was a painting that I made to process the grief of my friend. Deciding to publish a story wasn't easy, and I was really nervous about sharing it in a way that was approachable to other people, because I also knew that I also wanted it to be interesting to other people, not just, okay, Stephanie's pen pal died, but more like Stephanie is feeling this grief and feeling the story, and then transformed it into this new kind of painting. And today, as I go through what I wrote down, I want to know if you can see that feeling in the painting. And I think that's kind of what's important about telling stories with your work. So I'm going to read out what I wrote in the caption. Maybe the secret title of this episode is that you should be utilizing your captions on Instagram, but that feels way too like blasé for how intense this story was. So here we go. I started this painting as a way to process my grief. Last fall, my longtime pen pal died suddenly. It was a clear day in September when her father sent me a message on this platform. My first shocked reaction was to think a mean joke was being played on me. Getting a sentence in your DMs that says, Daria has died, feels unreal. In my shock, I reached out to her. We had been writing letters for 7 years, but we also chatted regularly online. Hi, was my note, still unread. I contacted her husband, her close friends, just desperate for someone to confirm that this wasn't real. They told me it was. They told me they would tell me more later, that they were dealing with bringing her body home. There, what do you even do? but be grateful that someone told you anything. Dark blue for frozen thoughts, fractal tones for the displacement. This painting is called Sleep on the Floor. That was the first part of what I wrote here. And that was the first moment where I thought, I could just delete this after posting it. I could just, if I posted it and I was like, maybe I should take it down. I think I stressed over it for like 10 minutes. Even though I had written out this whole story, I had everything scheduled and planned and ready to go on later. And I was just thinking, is this too vulnerable? Is this too open for me? Is this so much more open for me than in a way I had never been in the past? In the past, I had talked about death before because I've been around a lot of it in the last 3 years, and it's just, that's what life is. And I had like done little one post honorifics for people and for my animals or whatever. But this was way more intimate. But instead of deleting it, I decided I'm going to leave it up and I'm going to see what happens. And what happened was a kind of connection with my followers that I haven't had in a long time. I was getting messages from friends, from other painters that I haven't really spoken to at all. I was getting notes and engagement and people looking forward to reading the next part. I was shocked. I was shocked at how much that what I had written had touched people and that they were connecting to this 1/9 of this painting that I had painted, just like a single section. And I thought, okay, I have to keep telling the story now because I had started this and I think we should continue going. And so I did. Over the next couple of days, I continued to show new parts of this painting called Sleep on the Floor. Here's another. The exact details of her death are in newspapers somewhere, but I refused to look them up. The week that followed her death was ringing in my ears. I didn't realize how much Dasha had inhabited my home until I was looking for signs of her. A framed piece of art, a postcard with the writing side out on the fridge, a necklace on my bedside table. Looking at these little shrines of my love was a constant pressing of the wound, and I cried so much. Desperate for distraction, I threw myself into the preparation of my upcoming residency. I can hear the sorrow in my voice in the podcast episodes from that time. It's interesting to see how grief brings me an all-consuming kind of focus. Then, I got a letter in the mail. Purple's for keeping the wheel turning, blue for grief lurking in every action I took, green for supports, red for pressure. Part of me feels like this felt like a very dramatic kind of story. And on a platform like Instagram, I think you do need a little bit of drama to keep people on your post, to keep people connected. It was also very well that people were getting these segments of this painting in small doses, once in the morning, once in the evening, and that people might come into this story at different times. They might not have seen that very first post. They might have only seen the third and the sixth one, and that this story needed to capture people no matter when they were entering it. I think grief is an interesting story to talk about online, and I think that happiness is also an interesting story to talk about. Sometimes when we write stories, sometimes when we paint stories, it's not just big dramatic tales of tragedy and happiness and, like an epic. Sometimes they're much smaller. And I think having this authenticity when you're talking about a story is equally as important. Sometimes I look at paintings online, usually on Instagram, and I think, I looked at this painting, but after having read the caption, I feel much more connected to it. I feel like my understanding of that painting is now way deeper, and I feel like my perception of it and how much I care for it has improved. Not all stories need to be about grief or these big, extravagant epics that my story about Dasha is. If you want to read the whole of it, you can go on Instagram, and I think at some point I do want to make a performance piece about it. So that's something I've never done before and something that's terrifying. But sometimes when I think something is terrifying, that means it's the correct thing to do and I follow it. Who knows? You might see that at some point. But sometimes if you are making a piece of artwork and people don't know what it's about from your perspective as the creator, it can hinder the way people are connecting with it. I think also the balance is there where sometimes you gotta have moderation, right? But sometimes people tell you too much about the painting and you aren't able to form your own opinions. That's also something that you need to consider. Last year I did an interview with an artist and she told me that she didn't like telling the stories because she thought people would think she was too extreme for them. She was doing somewhat political paintings and they looked abstract. And when I looked at them, I had no idea about the concept that created these behind them. I don't think you have to tell the story of your painting, but once she told me what they were about and what inspired them, I was like, oh my gosh, you need to tell people these things because I appreciate your work so much more now having understood why you're doing this. And not every painting needs some grand adventure. Like my painting here about grief, but sometimes it's just like the story is, I really like the vibration between these two colors when you put them next to each other. And even that is enough. Even that interest is enough to get people hooked. Back in February, I took a vacation to visit some longtime friends of mine in Arizona. It was a weekend trip, and on this trip, my friend invited me to go to the art fair that was happening locally. This art fair was mostly painters, but also a couple of craftsmen, some people selling potpourri, some people selling chili and oils and stuff like that. And she was like, we should go because I'm looking for a painting. And I was like, say less, let's go. So we go into it and she looks at me about halfway through as we're going through the booths. And she's like, Stephanie, I can really tell when you don't like something. She's like, I can really tell when you don't like a painting and you think it's not very good in its craft. And I thought to myself, I should probably work on my poker face. But she's like, I came here because I wanted a painting of a donkey. And this was in the Southwest, right? So I was like, okay, we can find a painting of a donkey. It's probably going to be pretty easy to find. And she's like, the paintings I like are ones that I have connections to the artist to. And the ones that you like are technically very good. And I had to stop and think about that for a moment. And she continued on. She said, the paintings I love the most are when I know the stories of the paintings. The paintings I am drawn to that I want in my house, or when I know the artist has done something incredible, or the painting itself has a subject matter that is so strong that I cannot help but feel connected to it. We had gone to a fancier gallery. I'm going to say that quote unquote, like it was a permanent exhibit in town, not a tent for this art fair. And I had seen this landscape painting that was stunning. I was like, friend, you should get this for your house. This would look incredible in your living room. And she's like, oh, I like it. It's nice, but I don't know the artist. And I stopped and I was like, you don't know the artist, so you're not going to get it. Even though you think it's beautiful, you don't know the artist. She's like, I don't feel connected to its story. I've been thinking about recording this podcast since she said that to me. And I've been thinking about how stories connect people and probably help sell your art since then also. My family is in the realtor business. And one thing they always say is that sentimentality and connections is what sells houses. And I feel like that also connects with art. I feel like when people have a sentiment to you as an artist, or a sentiment to a painting in particular, they learn to love it. And building that sentimentality and building that connection and building that affiliation with people is one of the most important jobs of an artist to sell their work. I'm not sharing the details of my friend's grief to sell my painting. I'm sharing it because I want people to understand the painting. And I feel like if someone understood that painting enough to want to buy the painting, that's the kind of person I would want to own that piece of art. Does that make sense? I feel like you could take my words in a very capitalistic kind of manner, and I am American, so that kind of just happens. But I think sentimentality and storytelling are so important for connecting with your audience, and they're so important for connecting to your collectors, and that it really, really is important to influencing them into getting your art, to owning it, to purchasing it, even to giving it to a friend. I feel like when we don't tell stories about our art, when we leave paintings as Untitled 1, or we can't even describe or talk about the way we make our art, it really changes how people perceive us. We are the advocates for our own artwork. We are the advocates for our paintings. And if we don't talk about them in a way that is thoughtful and provoking and interesting, then the paintings themselves become less powerful in a way. It's strange to get a letter from the grave. Dasha had sent it to me 3 days before her death. I was scared to open it. What if it held details pertaining to her violent death? What if it was something important? What if it was a normal letter? It was. She wrote to me about an art exhibit in Minsk that she thought I would like. She said she missed my letters and hoped that I was doing okay, that she was happy and excited for her upcoming vacation. The truth is, because of the political turmoil in Belarus, I haven't been able to successfully send her a letter in over 2 years from the United States. The Post website calls it COVID precautions. It's really dictatorship aggressions. 3 of the letters she sent to me were opened, censored, and then sent. Under my bed, I have a pile of returned letters in a box. I've been collecting them in hopes to send them again if things ever got more peaceful. Dasha told me once that her people deserved oppression for not standing up. I told her, that sounds a lot like victim blaming. I can't imagine what it was like, what it is like. Dasha and I have never met in person, but I tried many times to see her. Red for the pressure, blue for grief, green for my hope. Sometimes I think about music and stories. Sometimes I think about Taylor Swift. Taylor just released her newest album, The Tortured Poets Department, and it is packed full of some of the most beautiful storytelling I've heard in a long time. I listen to it and I feel like I am her. I listen to it and I feel connection to this artist who I've never met, probably won't ever meet. And I feel her grief and her pain and her longing and her fury and her happiness and her joy and her depression. I feel this way about many musicians I listen to their music of, and I think this is how some people become obsessive over a musician, over an actor. It's because they feel that emotional connection to them. And I think that's what makes stories so incredibly important and why you should be telling people yours. Every time I went over the Atlantic was an attempt to meet you. If you mentioned a city in your letters, I saved my money and have found a reason to go. Every trip was a chance to hear your voice, a chance to make art with you, a chance to know how you walked and played and danced. No matter how many times I tried, we could never make it work. You were an art student, and then a struggling illustrator. I had no hope of getting a visa, and life was moving very fast. Writing to a pen pal is a lot like writing in your journal. You can share things with someone who lives on the other side of the planet and know that your secrets will be kept safe. It's having a confidant that gives you compassion, ideas, and love in a way that is untethered from your normal connections. Can I tell you how we met? Cerulean for halcyon days, grays for regrets, and red for misdirection. It can be scary to write your stories down. It can be scary to publish them. But I think if you don't, you are cheating yourself of the opportunity to make a connection with someone who has been where you've been, who feels compassionate enough to understand where you've been, and to connect with someone who might guide you further into that storyline. Your life is a story, right? You know how that saying people, let's be real, kids say, do it for the plot. You do it for the plot of your life stories. And that is poetic. It's a way to reach your new audience. It's a way to be authentic and intentional and purposeful in the way you behave in the world. I would love to encourage you to write about your artwork. And maybe it's this grand adventure, like I keep saying, and maybe it's a small story. Maybe you talk about what you were inspired when you made this painting. Why are you painting this nude figure in this certain way? Is it because you took a reference photo and just like got so excited about it that you had to make it art? Why are you doing the skyline in this certain color? Why are you picking out these paints, these pigments, and making your abstraction with it? Writing what you are feeling, writing notes in your journal, writing descriptions for your work, it's good practice for being able to speak about your work in the future, but also for you to make connections. This is how it starts. On Post Crossing, there was a profile from a cheerful art student in Minsk looking for other artists to write to. She said she liked The Little Prince, Sloths, and illustration. I sent her a postcard that told her how much I loved painting, how I always wanted to travel across the ocean, how seeing artwork brought me so much happiness. Do you feel that way too? I asked her. From there, we hit it off and sent many letters. Getting a letter from Dasha was like getting a piece of the sun in my mailbox. Sometimes she would send me little drawings of foxes drinking tea, a silly sticker, or a piece of Belarusian history. I sent her paintings, tarot cards, and a necklace that matched the one I owned, and also my favorite books. 2 months after Dasha's death, I went to the Chateau Orkovo art residency. In France, you can send mail to Belarus. In France, I faced my grief. Yellow for happiness, red for pain, green for space. Do you ever find yourself scrolling on TikTok or Instagram in the videos, and what you find is kind of just airy and like full of nothing? Maybe it's ASMR videos and you're hearing sounds that soothe your brain. Maybe it's educational and you're finding something interesting to do with your new camera setup. Maybe it's inspiration for clothing and dresses and whatever you want to wear. Maybe it's something else. Maybe it's just a cute video. Maybe it's something that makes you laugh. But a lot of the time, what I find on my feed, my For You feed, and maybe I've trained it to be this way, but a lot of the time it's noise, and it's nothing that stands out to me. It's nothing that makes me think, oh, this is so memorable and this is so impactful and I have to tell everyone about it. It's very rare that I find those. And I think being still with your feelings and your emotions and your story and being authentic and being intentional about how you're sharing it makes an impact. I think your paintings can do this too. Often I hear people complain about, in fact, I saw this like 3 times yesterday, people complaining about low engagement on Instagram, people complaining about how their videos or their still shots are just being looked over. No one's really paying attention. And I challenge these claims. And I'm not saying that they're not happening, that I bet people are skipping over these things and skipping over their images just to go to the next thing, because of the way we've been approaching our social media, but also the way that we are using our social media. Our stories become cheap for the sake of quantity. And I'm guilty of the same, where I will post a picture of something and I'll barely put anything in the caption. And why would people connect with it if it just says the title? Maybe even the title is untitled. Forbid. And why would people connect with something that is so half-hearted and so just blasé, and something that is put up just to be put up? Instead, think about the quality of what you're posting. Think about, is this reel I'm making, or this TikTok or whatever short form video you're making, actively telling a story? Is the painting that I put up telling enough of a story just by the image alone that people can understand what it's about? And if not, how do I get people to read the caption? How do I get people to look at what I want to say? And how do I use my stories to direct people there? And how do I, and by stories there, I meant like the IG stories. But like, how do I get people to connect with the story? And I think once you start shifting the way you post and you start shifting into a realm of authenticity, when people start seeing your images, they're going to slow down. That's pretty cool. Here's another. An art residency gives you the space to create in a way that is free from attachment. I had been working with geometric motifs for many years at this point, at Dasha's insistence actually, and I could feel a shift beginning to happen. I knew I still wanted to play with the grid, with triangles, with gold, but something needed to change, because I had changed. I remember the pattern work of the Belarusian ornament. They're usually red and white, perfectly balanced, and deep with ancient folklore agendas. I wanted to put Dasha into this painting, put what it felt like to grieve for her. I thought about American quilt work, and then I noticed the incredible rugs that were all over the floors of the chateau. And this painting is absolutely about textiles. It was in the early hours of long creative days, of playing with color and pattern in a new way, that I was able to remove the grip of grief on my painting and be with my sorrow. The tears I had were no longer about loss, but about celebrating my friend. The month flew by. Each day was getting easier and easier to see what was blooming in my mind. I had one important task to do before I left France. I had to write a letter to Daria's parents. Yellow for discovery, orange for innovation, blue for softening sorrow. If you are scared to tell your story, if you're scared to share what the true meaning of your work is, sitting with that fear of why am I scared to share it, and coming up with the what ifs and answering them can be a really therapeutic way to move forward in your artistic progress. Things that I thought about, my what ifs, were, what if I get punished for this? What if her family doesn't like that I'm talking about this? What if someone tries to use this story in a way to hurt me later on? What if someone wants to talk to me about this death and I'm not ready for it? What if by telling this story, I am unable to find a home for this painting? What if I tell this story and I become too attached to the work and I won't want to sell the painting? What if people don't understand what I'm saying and I offend someone? What if? I wrote all those what ifs down and I wrote them out in my journal, and then I deconstructed every single one. It took me a couple of days to do this. Deconstructed, what if her family didn't like the story? And then I thought, it's not their story to tell. They have their own story, and if they want to share it, they can. And I probably won't see it because they speak a different language than I do. And then I thought about, okay, what if by telling the story of this grief, that it changes the way that people see this painting for the worse? Like, what if no one wants to buy this after I share it? And then I thought, if someone liked this painting before, and then they read the story, now they don't like it anymore, this painting shouldn't go to them. Like, it wasn't for them. It was for someone who would understand the story. And then there's all the others, right? And so you go through your list of what ifs, and then you quietly and softly and gently with yourself dismiss them. Sometimes having a friend or even a therapist to help you with this is really key. It can be very helpful and can help you actually move forward and give you the courage to share the story. This next bit of Dasha's story that I'm going to share, I performed at the chateau. I performed this and it was terrifying. I performed this next part and I told everyone there that it was fiction and that this wasn't real. But the truth was, it was my story. It was straight from my journals. And I sobbed afterwards. People said to me, Stephanie, you seem like quite the empath. And I'm like, I didn't know how to say to them that the story was real and that I was just protecting myself by telling them it was fiction. And I think that's a lesson too. If you have a story you want to say, but it's too strong and it's too close, maybe you wait. Maybe you do it under a pseudonym. Protect yourself as you need. But here's this one. I'm terrified to write this letter to your parents. I'm terrified to write this letter because it means I'm not writing to you. If I pick up this pen, it means the closure to a story we were in the middle of. But if I don't do it now, my chance to tell your family how sorry I am for their loss will pass until I can get across the ocean again. And even then, there's a repeat chance of letter 47 that the Belarusian censors will dip this letter in alcohol and the words will be stolen. Dasha, I wanted to meet you so badly. As I sit here with a blank note and a capped pen, I think about the things you shared with me. Your dreams, your fears, breakups, successes. You told me things you've never told your inner circle, and Dasha, I promise to keep those secrets. Maybe in your next life, I'll be able to hold your hand. Maybe in our next life, we will be luckier. Maybe in the next life, I won't have to send this letter to your parents. Writing that letter was intense, and it took everything I had to get it done and get it into the mailbox. And it took me the entire month. I waited till the very last day to send it. I think it's important to share your stories when you're still close to them, even when it hurts a little bit, even when you're not that far out. The truth of your emotions will come forward, and the truth of what you're feeling will connect with other people better. I think life is a beautiful mishmash of connecting with people and connecting with their stories and listening really intently. And that understanding brings us a more peaceful life. On the last day of my residency, I sent her parents the letter, feeling infinitely lighter having done it. It took me 3 more months to finish Sleep on the Floor. It took me longer not to think about Dasha every day. The title comes from a rug and textile motif, from how it feels to be in grief, from my favorite song by the Lumineers, and by how much I adored her. This new motif is called the Shimmer Collection. I love the play with patterns, the light that seems to come within the color relationships, the curiosity I have when I come to the easel with this design in mind. Making a shimmer painting feels like writing to Dasha. And that's my way of honoring her. Now, all that's left is to organize her letters and let grief visit me when it needs to. Blue for remembering, yellow for inspiration, red for new beginnings. I'm now going to post the very last bit onto Instagram. Writing this story has felt like saying goodbye to her, but it's also felt like a new beginning in my own creative work. And I feel like showing the story, sharing what I've done, sharing this new creation, this new motif for my work has taken me from my Golden Fields journey into this new collection I'm calling the Shimmer Collection. And I've gently brought people over to it over the last 5 days of posting this giant painting called Sleep on the Floor. It feels like a rebirth, and it feels like a new chapter, and it feels really good to have this done. So I'm going to post it, and then I'll read this to you. Writing this has felt like saying goodbye. I usually try to distance my innermost feelings online, but sharing the happiness that Daria brought me feels right. I don't want to remember her by her death. I want to remember her by her joyful life. So I hope when you see Sleep on the Floor, you see my love for her. To end, I'll send you off with Daria's favorite way to say goodbye. Have a magic day. Navy for openness, yellow for sunlight, teal for curiosity, peach for life. This is the whole painting. You can see it on my Instagram grid. I feel relieved for having shared this story. Posting that last bit, having the grid looking like this. Look at it. Look at all those colors. I feel like the launching of the Shimmer Collection is now complete. I have this painting up. It looks amazing. And I told a story that was so heartfelt and so within my soul to share that I feel like I can be honest with what I was feeling in the past. I can feel honest with the last 6 months of going through this grief and going through the transformation and knowing that I'm never going to have a pen pal like her again, but I can't keep these feelings with me. And I can remember her and it can feel superb. I hope that today's very long-winded episode has encouraged you to share your own stories. I think stories are so powerful, and they help us connect with our artwork, and they help us connect with our collectors. And, I've said these things over and over again, but I truly believe that if you're not sharing your stories, you're missing out on such a wonderful thing that is connecting with your audience, that is connecting with people who love your artwork, and for you to feel for you to dive even deeper into your work and how wonderful that is. That's all I have for today's episode of Brushwork. Thank you for coming on this little journey with me and listening to my grief and listening to this story about me and my pen pal. If you post a story on your page or in your newsletter, I would love to read it or to hear it. You should tag me. My name is stephaniescott.art over on Instagram. That's also my website. And you've been awesome. If you've liked this episode of Brushwork, I would be delighted if you shared it with a friend. Give me a little subscription or a thumbs up or whatever. Take care and make good choices. And as Dasha would say, have a magic day. Bye.